Shalom. This week we are reading Parashat Ki Teitzei. You know, some people tend to regard the Torah as ancient history, and they tend to see all of its advice and all of its exhortations as being out of sync with our contemporary reality, and these people feel that what the Torah is telling us is not applicable to our modern day era. But the truth is, the Torah is speaking to our very generation and to every generation. In this week's Torah portion, Parashat Ki Teitzei, we read of a scenario of war. And in general, you know, there are two different types of war that we can find in the Torah. In our parsha, we read here in chapter 21 and verse 10, when you will go out to wage war against your enemies, and HaShem your God will deliver them into your hands, and you will capture his captivity. And here, the verse is speaking of some sort of absolute guaranteed victory over our enemy. And it's such a great victory that our biggest problem is how to deal with a very specific issue, the complex issue of the captive woman. And this subject is amazing and a very deep idea, and it can be interpreted on many levels. The captive woman, Eshet Yifat Toar. However, this is not our issue at the moment. But this victory is so complete that we have the luxury of dealing with this particular issue. But back in the book of Numbers, in Parashat Ba'alotcha, we read there of an entirely different type of military confrontation, and it's a totally different scenario. There, in Numbers chapter 10 and verse 9, we read, "If war is waged in your land against a bitter enemy, you shall sound the silver trumpets and be remembered before HaShem your God and be saved from your enemies." And this verse in Parashat Ba'alotcha is describing a near disaster. We're losing the war, it's a powerful enemy, the conventional instruments of war don't seem to be successful in defeating this enemy. And so the Torah teaches us that there's a special idea that these silver trumpets have a unique quality of invoking God's mercy. And we can successfully seek the miraculous intervention of HaShem when these trumpets are blown by the Kohanim. But the situation described there was so grave that we needed those trumpets to be blown. So we have here two different types of war, because the one described here in our parsha this week, Parashat Ki Teitzei, is one of total, absolute, and guaranteed victory. So what is the military explanation? What makes one war, the one described in the book of Numbers, so close to disaster, and the other in our parsha, a total victory? The answer is simple. The disastrous scenario in the book of Numbers opens with the words, "If a war is waged in your land," whereas the verse depicting the victorious war in our parsha states, "when you go out to wage war against your enemy." And the Torah is teaching us a simple truth. If we permit the enemies of Israel to penetrate into our land, if war is waged in your land, the situation indeed is going to be very grave. However, if we go out to wage war against our enemies on their soil, victory is guaranteed. And the truth is that we here in the land of Israel have experienced both scenarios, because the Six-Day War, which actually rewrote all of the military textbooks, began with a preemptive strike against the enemy on their soil, whereas the near disastrous Yom Kippur War was brought about by the fact that our leaders, myopic leaders, saw the enemy build up and yet chose to look away. And the Torah is not only teaching us basic rules of military engagement, the Torah is teaching us a profound truth regarding true leadership, and true leadership for the Jewish people, because if our leaders are blind to the reality of our enemies' intentions, if they choose to blind themselves and believe that our enemies can be pacified, then all they are doing is guaranteeing disaster for our own people. But if our leaders dare to take the initiative and to bring the battle to our enemy's door, then we will be victorious. And God instructs us here to take every measure to protect the land of Israel, his precious land, from our enemies.